But looking at crime and punishment, and today we're going to be focusing on highwaymen and highway robbery between 1700 to 1900. Now, during the early industrial period, highway robbery became a really serious crime, punishable by hanging. We know the authorities feared heresy, vagabondage and witchcraft between 1500 to 1700, but by the 18th century this had changed. The uncertainty after the religious reformation had passed, with 1612 being the last year a heretic was executed. 1700 to 1900 saw an overall increase in wealth, so the fear of vagabondage greatly reduced. Now, also, most educated people were less likely to believe accusations of witchcraft, and in 1736 the last witchcraft laws were repealed. Between 1700 and 1900, authorities now started to worry about crimes such as highway robbery and smuggling, both of which disrupted trade. Any crimes which threatened the wealth of landowners or employers were watched closely. Even poaching became punishable by death, and joining a trade union was also risking yourself. Highway robbery had actually started during the chaos, really, of the English Civil War, which had lasted between 1642 to 1649 between the King and Parliament. However, by the 1700s it had become a threat of epic proportions. They were feared by travellers. Authorities saw them as a major disruption to trade, and London and main routes to the capital were the worst to be hit by this crime. Now, today we often have a romantic image of highway robbers, but most were ruthless and nothing at all like the media has portrayed them. In one instance, when a highwayman's mask slipped, he cut out the woman's tongue so that she couldn't report him. So the crime of highway robbery involved threatening or attacking travellers and forcing them to hand over their valuable possessions. Although a problem from the Middle Ages, it became much more common in the 18th century. So why did it become more common during this period? Well, firstly, as trade increased, there was more need to move goods and money around. There were no cheques or debit cards and only a few banks where money could be kept for safekeeping. This meant business people and ordinary travellers often carried large sums of money around with them. Also, by the 1700s, because of the increase in wealth, there were more people travelling on their own in coaches, which made them much more vulnerable. Around this time as well, horses were cheaper to buy. And during the 1700s, there was no police force to catch them, and constables did not track criminals across counties. Also, during this period, there were wars in Europe, so when the demobilised soldiers came home, many of them struggled to get jobs, so found highway robbery a good way to get money. Highwaymen often had good relations as well with local tavern owners, so they were able to hide and sell their stolen loot in these taverns. And whilst towns were growing, the countryside was much less populated than it is today. So there were many more isolated and lonely country roads which were ideal for highwaymen to conduct their highway robberies. Many roads were improved during the 18th century. Turnpike trusts improved the road surfaces, charging travellers a toll to pay for these improvements. This led to more travel, including regular stagecoach services, which meant there were more people and valuables on the roads. So this led to the likes of people such as Black Harry. Whereas highway robbers who operated on foot were known as footpads, of course, because of the increase in the number of horses and the number of coaches, there was an increase in the number of highwaymen, who were the ones who rode horseback. Some highwaymen during this period became infamous. So, for example, in Derbyshire, there was Black Harry, who robbed pack mule trains. He was eventually caught and executed at Wardlow Myers. Now, it was considered a really serious crime, firstly because it disrupted travel between towns and therefore trade. It was also committed on the King's Highway, which made it a crime against authority as well, and it could involve the theft of mailbags, and so therefore it disrupted the postal service. However, during the end of this period, highway robbery did start to decline. And in 1772, in an effort to clamp down on the activities of highwaymen, the death penalty was introduced for anyone found armed and in disguise on a high road. It did continue into the 19th century, but after 1815 the crime became less common, and the last reported case of highway robbery was in 1831. One important factor contributing to the decrease in highway robbery was the use of mounted patrols on major roads in the 19th century so they could catch the robbers in the act. There was also the growth of the banking system. This meant that because more people were investing their money into banks, there was less need for people to carry large sums of cash with them in coaches, therefore much less profitable for highway robbers. JPs also started to refuse to license taverns that were frequented by highwaymen, and so therefore they weren't able to use these to store or to sell their loot. And stagecoach posts were introduced with regular staging posts where tired horses could be changed and travellers could rest for the night. Also at this time, open land around London and other towns was being built on as the population expanded. Therefore, there were less areas where there were lonely roads which could be vulnerable for travellers. So the sorts of question that you might be asked about highway robbery is explain why there was a rise in highway robbery after 1700, or explain why there was a decline in highway robbery at the end of this period. For both of these questions you will need 3 reasons, each explained with a separate paragraph for each theme, making sure that you include the point, which is your theme and your judgment, precise evidence in support of this, and then a detailed explanation as to how this evidence helps to answer the question either about the rise of highway robbery or the decline. To get the higher marks, you could also include relative importance, using the words firstly, secondly, thirdly, or most importantly. Lastly, you could ask me to describe 2 features of highway robbery, and in this case you'll need to pick 2 features, each with a point, making sure that you use extra evidence to explain that point so that you get 2 marks for each one. Thank you very much for listening. This is CL Barber.